Alright guys, got a video here for you today on the Anschutz 9015. What we're going to be doing is making a cheek riser for our bench rest stock. Before we get into that though, I do just very briefly want to say thank you to everyone who turned up to the Pete's Airgun Farm night shoot. The event itself went really quite well. We had a good turnout and we did actually meet some people who watched the channel. But with that said, on with the video. First part we're making is the cheek riser body, and to do that we're just using some square aluminium. The first job, as always with the mill, is to square off the stock. So what I'm doing is just using a nice big face mill and just milling off each side one by one. The wood that you're seeing in the back there is just to help counteract any irregularities on the back of the stock. The idea for squaring up stock is that you always place the freshly milled face against the fixed jaw of the vise. And as long as it's pressed up against the vise face nice and securely, the face that you mill should be square to the one used as a reference. It's not super critical for this piece, but it's always much easier to work from a nice square platform. But once all sides are milled down to size and are square to each other, it's time to mill the stock to length. To do that we're just using an end mill and coming along and milling each end. Next up we can start putting some holes in. So the two outside holes, or the ones on either end, are going to be the hold down holes, and these are going to be used to secure the actual piece into the stock itself. The ones along the back edge though are going to be used for parts of the cheek riser. And the two outer ones in this are going to be holes for the riser posts, and the one in the middle is going to be a clearance hole for a ball screw that we're going to be using for the cheek piece adjustment. The riser post holes are drilled out to 10mm, and to ensure that the hole's a nice good finish, we're coming through with a 9.5mm pilot drill, then finishing it off with a 10mm drill. The hole in the middle is going to be a clearance hole, and that's going to be drilled out to roughly 12.5mm. We didn't do that in this operation as I didn't have the ball screw yet, but I did drill that out off camera. Next up we're going to be milling out some slots to accept cap head bolts. I was going to use regular wood screws with a countersunk head, but I changed my mind as we was walking through the build, and I decided I was going to use inserts in the stock and cap headed bolts. But with that done, we can flip the piece on its side and start work on the other features. First thing we're going to do is mill out a slot in the middle of the piece to accept a thumb nut. The up and down motion of the cheek piece is going to be controlled by the use of a thumb screw, or a thumb nut in this case. The ball screw is going to be fixed, and to move the actual cheek piece up and down, we're just going to simply turn a little thumb nut. It sounds much more complicated than it actually is, but you'll see what I mean as we walk through the build. To get the slot milled in there, we're coming through with a pilot drill, drilling all the way through, then coming through with a free flute end mill and just clearing out the hole. The hole itself is going to be about 13mm wide and about 32mm long. We're coming through and roughing out the material, then slowing the mill down and putting a finish pass on the outside. This will just clean up the walls and make sure that there's no chatter within the radiuses. Next up we can drill and tap the holes for the locking screws. These are going to be M6 screws, so we're coming through spot drilling, then drilling out 5mm, then coming through with a M6x1 tap and getting the holes tapped in there. The locking screws themselves are just going to clamp on the riser posts and stop them from moving. Up next we need to round the corners of the piece. To do that we're using a corner radius end mill and just putting a 5mm radius on each one of the corners. We need to do this as the slot that we mill in the stock will have radiused corners. We could come through with a chisel and chisel out the corners so that they're square, although it's just easier to radius the corners now. With that done we can mill the waste material off the back of the piece, and this will get it finished off. We're milling this material out for two reasons. Number one, to save a bit of weight, and number two, to make inletting the stock a little easier. And to do that what we're doing is coming through with a roughing end mill first, removing most of the waste material, then just finishing it off using a standard 3-flute end mill. The roughing end mill does remove a lot of material nice and quickly, although it doesn't leave a very nice finish. Though roughing it out first, then coming through and finishing the walls up. Up next we can make the top plate for the cheek riser, and to make this we're just using a flat piece of aluminium. The piece itself is going to be roughly 12mm thick and about 20mm wide. And like with the body of the cheek riser, we're just coming through and squaring the stock off first. I won't show you all of this as we did show it in the previous step, but once the stock's squared up nicely, we can come through and drill the corresponding holes in the top. To mount the riser posts and the ball screw, we're just using some M5 countersunk screws. So we need to get the holes drilled out 5.5mm and then countersink the holes so that the screw heads are nice and buried into the aluminium. With that done, we can flip the part in the vise and counterbore the holes. As we've got a vise stop up, we can just flip the part and then readjust our wire position and use the same zeros so we don't have to recenter anything or use the edge finder. And to counterbore the holes, we're just using a 10mm end mill. With the holes in the top done, we can flip the part on its side and radius the corners. We're doing this for the same reason we radius the corners on the body of the cheek riser. Next up, we can mill out the slots for the screws. Now the cheek piece is going to be adjustable left and right, so the securing screw needs a slot that it can run in so that we have this adjustment. To mill the slot out, we're just using a 5mm slot drill, coming through and plunge drilling the material out, then cleaning up the sides by just running up and down them. The slot width will turn out to be roughly 5.5mm, which will give the M5 screw a bit of clearance, so if we need to, we can put a slight angle on the cheek piece. With the slots milled, the final operation on this part is just to create some relief for the socket-headed screws. To do that, we're just coming through with a 10mm end mill and milling out the other side of the slot. With that part done, we can turn our attention to the riser rods. Now the riser rods are nice and simple to make. It's just a piece of stainless steel turned down to 10mm with a M5 hole tapped in one end. So you can see us making them here. First up, we just faced one end, then put a centre drill in it and got a centre mounted, turned the OD down to 10mm, used a little bit of Scotch-Brite just to clean the finish up, and then parted the piece off. We made 4 of these, so 2 for the cheek riser and 2 for the bag rider. Next thing to make is the thumb nut. Now this will be the thumb wheel that we use to raise and lower the cheek piece. And to make this, what we've got is some 32mm stock chucked up in the lathe, and we're just facing and turning it to OD. The OD we're looking for here is 30mm, although as it's going to be knurled, this isn't critical. With the OD turned to 30mm, we can drill out the centre for 12mm, which is clearance for the ball screw. And to make sure that the internal finish is nice, we're coming through with an 11mm drill first, piloting out all the waste material, then coming through with a 12mm drill and finishing out the hole. Next up, we can get the straight knurl put onto the nut. This will just make it a little easier to turn when it's in the stock. So coming through with a straight knurling piece and just putting that knurl on. With that done, we just need to create a little bit of relief on either end of the nut so that it will fit into the slot we milled out in the cheek riser body earlier. Again, you'll see what I mean when we actually put it together, but we need a small amount of material removed off from either end of the nut so that it clears the radiuses inside the riser body. With one side done, we can finish off the knurl with just some Scotch-Brite, and that will just remove any of the sharp edges and then part the piece off. With that done, we can remount the part in the 3-jaw chuck, being nice and careful not to mar the finish that we've just put on, as we are only gripping the part by a very small piece. To finish this side off, all we need to do is face it to length and then mirror the relief that we put on the other side. With that done, we can finish the part off with some chamfers and make sure everything's nice and deburred. With that done, we can finish the part off in the mill, and all we need to do in this operation is drill and tap a hole in the side of the thumb wheel. As we're using a ball screw for up and down adjustment, we're just going to be putting a ball bearing in this hole, then capping it off with a grub screw, and that will allow the thumb wheel to act as a nut on the ball screw. The last thing to do was to finish off the ball screw. Now the ball screw itself was just bought from eBay, and it's a 12mm diameter by 4mm pitch. And all we need to do to the ball screw is face the end, then drill and tap it M5, and this will allow us to fix the ball screw into the top piece of the cheek riser. Then we can part it off to length. And here we have the cheek riser unit all put together. We're just loosely for now, but I just wanted to make sure it all fit and it all worked together nicely. So if we twist this wheel here, we see that the cheek piece rises and lowers as we twist the wheel. On this side we have the 2 securing bolts, or the locking bolts I should say. These are just placeholders for now, as we need to actually fit the unit into the stock and finish the stock in order to calculate the length of these bolts. And then obviously we'll have little thumb screws put over the bolts so that they look nice and it's easy to adjust when we're actually sitting at our bench. The actual unit itself is biased to one side so that when it's inlet into the stock, the wheel itself is roughly about 5mm in from the stock, so it's not sticking out, but you can, or you will still be able to use the thumb wheel nice and easily without having to sort of put your thumb into a hole or anything like that. But there we have it. It's all finished. So that's going to about do it for this one, guys. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.